I want to take one brief moment and ask a quick favor. If you enjoy the content of the ExEm Podcast, please hit the subscribe button to keep up with new episodes as they are released, and give us a comment if any of our episodes have made an impact on you. Thanks so much for making this podcast go global and reach those who are looking for a little encouragement, education, and most importantly, more insight into what it means to live a Christian life during difficult times.
It's the ExEm Podcast with licensed mental health therapist Matthew Kanabe.
So every now and then on the ExEm Podcast, we dive into challenging topics that individuals have faced in their life. And this episode is no exception. I'm incredibly grateful for our guest and the transparency she shares with us. However, I must emphasize, while all topics we cover are appropriate, some may not be suitable for young children. So in this case, it might be best to throw in some headphones, just in case there's some little ones around. All right, with that being said, I am excited to invite you to hear her remarkable story. It's truly inspiring to witness the resilience and strength of her family, as they navigated through major life adversity while maintaining their unwavering faith. Please welcome to the show a fellow podcaster and author, Wendy Rollin. So, Wendy, I'm very excited to meet you in person.
Oh, thank you.
So, I want the audience to know kind of how you and I connected, because I think it's interesting. You're a podcaster.
Yes.
I'm a podcaster. And you had sent an email to Emerge with interest in talking to somebody about clinical counseling and what that may look like for Christians. And so I responded, and we started an email conversation back and forth. And then I got to do your podcast, and we're gonna talk about your podcast. So I don't want to get too far ahead, which was so much fun. But as I was doing your podcast, I got to learn about you. Yeah. And so we finished the recording, and then we had another conversation, which I already told you I wish we were recording.
Yeah.
And I got to know you, and I'm like, hey, you've got to be on our podcast now. And so we scheduled that. I recorded with you a couple weeks ago. But first off, thanks for having me on your podcast.
No, well, thanks for being on my podcast.
And thanks for being on my podcast.
You're welcome.
And so I am super excited for our audience to hear about you. But before we get into your story, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a mother of four adult children now. It's hard to believe. And I'm a grandmother of 7, which is even harder to believe. Yeah. But, I've lived a life of, wanting to be around my children while raising them, and very close to my children. And in 2012, my son was in a very tragic accident where a young life was lost, and he was so close to the little girl that it was as if he lost a sibling. And so my journey, my testimony, not starts there. It starts when I was younger, always feeling close to God, but not really knowing my place. And then I dealt with a lot of hardships. But throughout my life, I questioned, why is this always happening to me? And then when my son was in his tragic accident, I realized that God was building me up to be the person that I was for him during his tragedy and his need.
Yeah. Are you able, I know we kind of jumped in right there, but maybe share a little bit for our audience to get some context around maybe what happened in 2012.
So in 2012, it was in February, and it was a beautiful day. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was taking my 2 other children from a doctor's appointment, and there wasn't school that day. And my phone rang, and I noticed it was my son, so right away I picked it up, and he told me, "Mom, you have to come quick." And I said, "What is going on?" And he said, I won't use the real names, but I'll use the names in my memoir. And he said, I accidentally backed over Ellie, and you have to come quick. So I asked where he was at the moment, and he had told me that he was at his friend's house. And so I, rushed there, but I can't even put into words of trying to get to him, and the world just seemed like it stopped, like no matter how hard I was trying to get to him, how fast, everything stopped around me, like a magnet pulling me back. I couldn't get to him quick enough. Well, then I finally did. I had called my husband, and I had told him that Matthew was in an accident and that he had accidentally backed over Ellie. And I accidentally, which I didn't know that his friend had moved, I was going to the old house.
Oh.
So then I had met my husband at an intersection, and I got a phone call from Matthew, and he had said that, where are you at? You know, how much longer are you going to be? And I said, I'm on my way. And then it dawned on me, like, for some reason to ask him, you know, if I was going to the correct house. And he had said that his friend Zach had moved. But at that moment, I heard a helicopter above me. And I looked out, and I knew that that helicopter was where my son was. And so I followed the helicopter, and sure enough, I got there. And when I saw my son, he was there, you know, standing, but to see him almost lifeless, you know, as he was trying to get to me through the chaos, which was, it was chaos because of what was happening, but, you know, everyone was very professional, you know, the EMTs, the police, everyone conducted themselves, you know, in a professional manner. But even in that time, him running to me and him collapsing in my arms, it is even hard to me to think back to that moment, because I didn't know what the future at that moment was going to be, but I could tell everything just changed. And I didn't know how bad Ellie was at that time, you know. So then from that moment, you know, we were waiting for them to take off with Ellie. And then Matthew had, you know, gotten interviewed by the police officer. And the detective was very kind, very friendly with him. But standing there and watching my son in the back of a cruiser, and not back in the cruiser as far as he did something wrong. The door was open. He allowed him to sit there to get off of his feet. But my son's life flashed in front of me. I saw my little boy. You know, I saw his kindness, his compassion, his love for Ellie, because they were so close. And then not knowing what was in store. But from that point, you know, he wanted right away to get to the hospital to be by the family, because he was very close to Ellie's family as well. And let me back up a little bit. What had happened was he was dropping his friend Zach off at the house, and Zach's mom wasn't home at the time, but the second oldest brother was babysitting, and there was a group of the kids outside playing, and Matthew had never known that Ellie was even there, and he didn't see her.
And how old was she?
She was 3.
Okay.
3 years old. And so then we got to the hospital. Ellie's family was there, her mother, her father, all of her siblings, their extended family, and Matthew went in and sat right with them. And the moments of waiting and the anticipation of waiting to hear what's, you know, the outcome, or if she's going to be okay, and to see my son sit there with so much compassion for her family, but to be so scared too.
Sure.
You know, and then we're sitting there, and then the news comes on, and it's, you know, the accident. And of course, the news has a way of spinning everything but the truth. And they had said that, you know, her boots flew off from the impact, and none of that was true. Her boots had fallen off when they picked her up to take her to the side to give her CPR. And then we waited in the main waiting room for a while, and then her parents came out and said that she wasn't doing good, and that they were going to take her in for surgery. And they moved us into a bigger room, But at that point, Matthew was very, upset, and he couldn't compose himself. So there was a chaplain that came over and moved us to the side into a separate room, and we waited for hours. And it was nice to be alone with him because I could be there for him and talk, him through that time of waiting. But at the same time, it was hard because we couldn't hear what was going on and where things were at. And then my husband went out to check to see, how she was doing and how surgery was going, or if she was out. And it was like a sliding door, like sliding French door, pocket doors.
Sure.
And I saw him stop before he came in, and he took a deep swallow breath, and I'm like, oh no. And then before he had done that, Matthew kept saying, we haven't heard anything. No news is good news. She must be doing okay, So he had a lot of hope. But then when I did see him at the door, I knew, my instinct knew. And he had walked in, and my son, bounced up from the chair. And he was 17 at the time, so he was young. And I stood up with him, and he said, "Is she okay?" And my husband shook his head and said, "No, she didn't make it." And right at that time, he dropped to his knees and just curled into the floor and cried and cried. And, what I had been doing from the time he called me to the time of hearing that she passed was pray. I knew that I didn't have the strength on my own to help him, that this was way beyond anything that I could ever handle on my own or know how to handle. So I prayed, and I prayed God every second that I could to help me, because I knew I needed help, and I knew his life drastically changed.
Yeah.
And so from that point, we stayed there a little bit to let him compose himself. I moved out of the room for a few minutes to get my breath and to compose myself, to get my strength. And then I came back into him, and we eventually left. He had a very hard time walking. He was gone. He just couldn't comprehend, what was happening, or want to comprehend it, in all honesty. And then we guided him out into the hall, and then one of Ellie's family members, I believe it was a great uncle, had stopped in the hallway and placed his hand on Matthew's shoulder and said that he was praying for him. And then at that moment, Matthew he couldn't even walk anymore. So my husband picked him up and carried him out to the car. And then from then on, it was trying to help him heal.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how did Ellie's family respond to him, and how was that? And that had been so difficult.
They were so supportive of Matthew.
They were.
His mother showed so much compassion and wanted to make sure Matthew was okay. I believe it was the following day after the accident, she came to the house with her boys. And I opened the door, and she went straight to Matthew and gave him the biggest hug and said that she loved him and it wasn't his fault.
That's incredible.
It is very incredible. And she always stayed that way. There was never a time that she didn't have compassion for Matthew. Even through the funeral, all of that, she always wanted to know how Matthew was doing and tried to stay close. There was, and we'll get to it, there was a time where Matthew pulled away from everyone. He couldn't handle even being himself anymore.
Yeah.
It really became a battle of keeping my son alive because he didn't want to live anymore. But through it all, his family was wonderful towards Matthew.
What a testimony for them.
I know.
I think
I mean, these are those things that are you just don't even want to think about. It's like, I think as a parent, one of the scariest things that could happen. But I think when you take a step back, it's like on all ends it was an accident, you know? And to have that grace that I know God desires for all of his children to have, for his family to respond that way is pretty incredible.
Very.
Yeah. So what was life like for Matthew then?
We'll be right back.
Are you exhausted from carrying it all and realizing something has to change? What if 4 days could give you the clarity and breakthrough that normally takes 6 months of counseling? The Soul Care Intensive program is open to anyone ready to do deep, focused work. In just 4 days, you'll complete comprehensive assessments, receive 8 hours of therapy, a follow-up report of the sessions, tools, and aftercare options, all in a distraction-free environment built for real change. This experience is especially powerful for couples working through marital strain, communication breakdowns, or years of unresolved tension. If you're tired of surviving and ready to get unstuck, don't wait. Check out emerge.org/intensives today. A Soul Care Intensive is for you when waiting is no longer working, because staying the same is no longer an option.
So for a while, we got through the funeral, which was very hard because if I could explain the way that Matthew looked and held himself during that time would just be death itself. He wasn't there anymore. He checked out. He didn't want to see life anymore. He loved Ellie so much. She was his little shadow. And he hated himself for what had happened. And he was truly giving up on life. And, going to the showing was hard. He couldn't stay in the room very long, and then he moved out to the hallway and sat. But he was surrounded by many people that loved him. But even with that being said, when you're going through something like that, and you may be in a room full of compassionate people, you still feel alone because no one knows that true feeling of what you're dealing with. And I knew that for him because of things that I have gone through in my past. But then we moved to the funeral itself, and then there was like the gathering after. And, during the funeral and all of that, I thought, oh boy, God, I need your help. I don't know how I'm going to help him. And then I seen a little bit of life come back to him once he saw everyone together, smiling, afterwards, eating. His family, his mother, smiling and interacting with people. And I saw this look and I'm like, okay, I see Matthew, a little bit of Matthew again. But that didn't stay for very long. For a little while, he continued to allow his friends in his life and his friend Zach. But then slowly he started pushing them away. Like he didn't want to face life anymore. He just hollowed out and he was done. And for a while he kind of moved into the basement, and the only time for about a month, I would say, at least a month, the only time he would come out was if he would have to use the restroom or shower. He just was checked out. And so I would do what I could to be there to support him, but also give him his space so he could figure out his life. I tried counseling with him, but he didn't want to talk about it. He wanted left alone. He wanted the outside world just to go away. So I made sure that he knew my presence was there, as Jesus has always let me know that his presence is with me. So I thought, that's what I got to do for my son. And that's what I did. And I tell you, it's hard. It is so difficult because you want to be down there with them all the time, and I watched from a distance, and I went down, and I encouraged him to come out. But I also knew that I couldn't push too much, because if I pushed too much, he was going to pull further away from me. Mm-hmm. So I did give him a space. But then there was times when he did come out, and he would be at a loss, and he would just cry and get so angry. And there was a time, several times honestly, where he would just lay in fetal position on the kitchen floor or the dining room floor. And I would lay down beside him, and I would just hug him, and I would pray, and I would here and there talk about faith and things that I had gone through in my life, and how God had helped me. And he would listen, but I knew he wasn't, bringing it all in. But I just kept being there for him and making sure he was okay. And then there was times where it escalated, at the time where he started really pushing everyone out, and no one was in his life anymore except his immediate family. And there was a point where he was in my bedroom, sitting on my bed, and he had a knife in his hand. And I stood at the door, and I paused. And he wasn't he didn't have it up to him. He was just sitting there, and he was looking at it, the thought was in his mind, I have this knife and it could end everything type of thought, from what I could take from that moment. And I stood there, and I started talking to him. And he said, "I don't know if I believe in God, Mom." He's like, "How could any God, allow this to happen? Take Ellie away in this manner." And I said, "Matthew, if you don't believe in God, why are you angry at him?"
That's good.
And he paused, and he looked at me, and then I worked my way over to him, and I sat by him, and I put my arm around him. And I explained that God, doesn't cause these things to happen, but he's here to help us in the middle of it. And that if he leans on him, he'll help him, he'll guide him, he'll give him strength to pull him through. And that's how I've made it through things in my life. And he said, "Mom, I'm not as strong as you." And I said, "Matthew, it's not my strength."
Yeah, good.
And he absorbed that. He did take that in. But
Was
then,
that relatively soon after, or was it a year later, a couple of years later?
I cannot give you an exact estimate of time, because there was so much different things like that did happen throughout that time. Because there was a time where he did start allowing people to come back into his life. And then I was so excited and happy for those moments, especially when he let Zach come back in, because them two, if there was a definition of best friends, that it was them. They were so close, closer than brothers, just that, what you think of a best friend story, inseparable. So when he pushed him out of his life and Ellie's family, I knew, oh boy, this isn't good. And when he started allowing him back in, I thought, okay, this is, we're going somewhere, we're in the positive. But then he started allowing other friends in, which I was so glad to see, but it was for all the wrong reasons. He was allowing them in to escape, not Zach, but some of the other friends, where he started drinking, and he was drinking so heavy where he was blanking out. He was trying to get rid of everything, and it got so bad to where I finally had to put my foot down to a lot of them and said, "Hey, I'm going to press charges if this doesn't stop." Because when it would get to that point, and I would get a phone call, because Matthew had stopped driving for the longest time, I would get a phone call, and I would have to go get him, which my kids always knew, no matter what is the situation, call me. but I would have to pay the price of his friends letting him escape in that way, because all of his anger, not physically, would come out on me, but, words, verbally, like, the hate for himself and the things that happened. And so it was what I was already dealing with times 100. And he was even more suicidal in those moments where it almost gave him the courage to actually maybe make it happen. Yeah. Luckily he never did. So there was times where he would disappear in the night, and I did everything I could to try and stay awake until he fell asleep, but he would wake up, and then I would go to check on him and he wasn't in the house. There were a lot of situations like that where I would just pray and I would go search for him, and then I would get him back to the house, or he would come back. And that's a lot of what that time looked like in the dark moments was prayers. But I knew beyond my praying and leaning on Jesus for strength, I knew I needed help. And so I started seeking out counseling because I knew he wouldn't. So I had to figure out how I could help him even further.
Good for you.
And so for about a year, I did counseling. And, oh man, I got so many tools to help me help him that I don't even know if the outcome would be the same, you know.
We'll be right back.
LPC, LPCC, IMFT, LISW, PhD. If you don't know what any of those are, go ahead and hit the 30-second fast-forward button and enjoy the podcast. But if you know someone or happen to have those credentials, then Emerge might be your next career path. If you're seeking to join a team that provides authentic Christian counseling and utilizes advanced modalities, then apply today at emerge.org/careers and join us in the battle to help people find freedom and rest.
That's a huge encouragement for therapists and the thing that we do. What was Matthew like before this event? Like, just to give our audience an indication of, like, the shift, like one event. Like, we're talking about a split-second event that can completely change the course of a life. And talk to me a little bit about who he was before that happened in 2012.
Matthew, before 2012, a farm kid. Mm-hmm. He worked from the age, I'm thinking about 12, 13, on farms. Always eager to help. He loved being around people. He loved family life. Very close to his grandparents and cousins and lots of friends. Eager to please. Hard worker. He did suffer with anxiety. He did have worry. He worried a lot. But he managed it. Mm-hmm. So when the accident happened, already dealing with anxiety, it was elevated.
Sure.
And just that farm boy, always on the farm working, that was his life.
Yeah. And so if I'm doing the math right, he would be in his early 30s?
Yeah. He'll actually be turning 32.
32, yeah. I was thinking 31, I think, if I'm doing the math. I'm not a math guy, but I can do it somewhat quick in my head. Where is he at now? How's he doing?
He is doing absolutely amazing. For many years he had the very bad, heavy breakdowns, and eventually he did seek out counseling. And it really wasn't all that long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, he finally started going to counseling. But he got to the point where he knew that he could not live with that anger inside anymore. And he did, have faith. He did lean on God, even though at that time he pulled himself away. I could see, especially after I had that talk with him leaning more on faith. And he did. He started going to church, and he started talking to me about, faith in Jesus. But now, well, I would say about 8 years, the breakdowns were really heavy. It took a long time, and they eased up. They didn't stay that dark, heavy that it was over time. Less and less, not as bad. And especially, I noticed once the alcohol went away, that's when he could fully focus on himself.
Yeah, good.
And he knew he couldn't live that way anymore. He knew God had him here for a reason. And honestly, it was when I was just finishing up the memoir, I had asked him, I want to double check that you're okay with this coming out. And he said, Mom, I handed it all to God. And he said, I couldn't handle it anymore, and I knew I had to hand it over to him, and I'm okay.
I mean, I think that's so encouraging. First off, I can't imagine all the people involved. Like, as a therapist, I try to take the perspective of each person. Your son, yourself, his, the family that was affected, and I can't imagine navigating that. And certainly, from my perspective, just hearing your story and hearing this, you can see God's hand through the whole thing. But what I think might be really interesting for audience is just kind of sharing, how does a mother navigate this with their son? Because I'm sure we had my daughter, my 8-year-old, had her tonsils out last week, and we had an incident last night, and she was in the ER till about 2 a.m. And just watching my daughter in pain, it is awful. Like, I will almost do anything in the world to take that away, which then brings us back to the cross, which reminds us of like what God has done for us, what Jesus has done for us. But watching your son navigate this internal pain that, as a mom, there's not a whole lot you can do to fix. You can't go back in time. You can't change the situation. Just talk to me, because I know 100% there is a parent listening to this conversation right now that is navigating a life situation that might have different details and circumstances, but is trying to figure out how to parent a child who is hurting or is wounded or is in a dark place, whatever it may be. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit, like, how do we do that as a parent?
So a lot of my strength, obviously, as I mentioned, I gather from my faith, but I dealt with a lot in my life growing up. And honestly, when I was 17, I went through a very traumatic event as well. But going back even further, I always felt kind of lost in life. I never knew my place. I knew that I was so drawn to wanting to know more about Jesus, but I didn't really know where to go with it. I had a hand-me-down King James Bible that when I was a little girl, it was one of the really huge ones.
Sure.
And so I had this closet in my bedroom, and I had read in there about, to pray in a closet. So my innocent mind when I was young was I would drag that Bible in that closet. I would shut myself in there with a flashlight, and I would read the Bible.
Very literal.
Very literally. So I taught myself a lot that way, but still I didn't really know the ins and outs of what it really meant to follow Jesus. But I was always eager to learn more. My family had, by the time I was born, they had stopped attending church. I'm the Christian, but not faithfully involved with the church. So throughout my life, there was events that happened, and there was, I would say, early teens. I remember questioning God. God, what is my purpose here? I feel so lost in life. I was the youngest out of 6 kids, and everyone had their place, and then there was me lost, the baby. And I remember thinking, why am I even here? Are you even listening to me? And I went to a window in the hallway, and I sat there, and I'm like, God, just let me know. You know, I was so young, and at that time, I just looked out. I put my elbow on the windowsill, and I looked out, and there was this ginormous meteor shower. And I remember feeling to myself like, you know, in my innocent mind, okay, you know, that's my sign, you know, even knowing that I had a purpose. I was just young, and I didn't know it at the time. But I felt like I was being strengthened throughout my teenage years, and each time something happened to me, I was drawing more in on my strength with Jesus. So when I was 17 years old, I was sexually assaulted. I don't want to go too much in on that moment, but I will go into how I was treated afterwards. I came forward, you know, I went to the hospital, nervous wreck, but a lady that I had worked with encouraged me. I went to her house afterwards and had said what happened. She called my mother, and we went to the hospital. And, you know, 17 years old, something terrible like that happening, you know, I felt empty, and I felt lost, and I felt like I did something wrong, like I was, it takes part of you away. So when Matthew was going through things, even though it was different, I knew how a 17-year-old going through something horrific felt as a teenager. Oh,
I just correlated the age.
Yeah, yep.
And I want you to keep going. I'm sorry for what happened to you. I can't, I don't want to gloss over a traumatic event that happened to you and not just acknowledge as a brother in Christ that I'm so sorry that that happened to you.
So the first thing that I can remember after that moment was when I was being interviewed by the police, and I really truly hope things have changed since that time. You know, this was 94. So, oh no, sorry, Matthew was born in 94. This was 92-ish, 91, 92-ish. I'm not that good at math either.
That's all right.
So the first question that was asked to me was what I was wearing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and even then I thought, why are you asking me that? How is this my fault, no matter what I would have been wearing? And I remember right away saying I was wearing baggy jeans and a baggy T-shirt, like trying to let him know that this was not my fault. You know, and I really hope it's changed since then. I hope that a victim is not treated in that manner. I hope that they've come a long ways in the interviews after a traumatic event.
I hope so too.
But once the word had gotten out of what had happened, I was treated so poorly, you know, being this young girl, a victim of a crime, and I was being treated as if I was the perpetrator. I was doing everything that I could to block out what happened. I just wanted to be that carefree young 17-year-old girl. And I tried to go on with my life like nothing happened. I didn't even want to press charges because I didn't want to sit in front of a room and face what had happened to me and to be questioned, and especially being the way that I was treated. I tried to still be around my friends and do things, but there was times I did pull away from people. But because of how I was being treated, I knew that I couldn't allow myself to be treated that way because it was too hard. There was a girl that I had gone to the party with, and I had gone with her because she had a crush on a boy that was there, and I really didn't want to go, but I did. And it was after I was being very mistreated and called names, and I'll get into all of that, but I remember asking her if she wanted to go do something, and she said, you know, my mom doesn't think it's a good idea. We're friends anymore. She doesn't want us to hang out. And I thought to myself, being that young girl is like, why? I didn't do anything wrong. And that was it. That was the last that I had talked to her. And then I also before that had happened, she wanted to go to a basketball game. And, obviously this was after the assault. And I said, yeah, that I would go, but I was nervous because I knew how I was being treated. And so I went into a basketball game, and it wasn't my home school. Never was I mistreated at my home school. It was in the vicinity of where, the assault had happened. And there was a family there. It was busy. There was, obviously the game going on, and I'm standing there just in the doorway by the bleachers, and the game had just ended. And there was a family that had walked out, and the girl just yelled at me and said, whore. Mm-hmm. And everyone stopped, and everyone just looked at me. And I remember standing there so firm, not letting anyone see that they had an effect on me. But what got me even more than the girl calling me that was her mother, her father, and it must have been two friends of theirs, was right behind her. And her mother turned to the lady behind and said, if my daughter says she's a whore, she's a whore. And I remember my friend looking at me like, oh my goodness, wow. But then it was after that my friend had said that her mother, didn't want us hanging out anymore. But there were so many situations like that. People were calling my mom and harassing her on the phone, making fun of me to her, me being her daughter. And I remember feeling so embarrassed for my family that I was their child or their sister, or I felt for them. And I was just so beat down to the point where I was almost numb to stuff inside. I pulled away and things hurt, but I numbed myself to the world. And then there was a time where I tried to keep my job as long as I could, but the harassment started going into my work, and I ended up being homeschooled. But there was a time where my mom wanted to go to the store, and it was a store where I had worked. And I was pulling down the side street, and at a McDonald's was a group of kids. And I said, Mom, I just want to prepare you. That's a group of kids. Something is about to happen. And sure enough, they fouled, and they were circling around my car. I can't remember if they were yelling anything out, but I remember seeing the laughing and all of this. And my mom, they didn't realize it was her. She stood up out of the car, and then they just laughed and pulled away. But there was other times, like where I was at a function and this girl said really loud, I'm going to get a ride home, and she named the person that had assaulted me, and she said, but I'll be okay because I know how to keep my legs closed. There was just a lot of that from every direction happening to me. And during that time, never did I ever think suicide. I questioned God, obviously, why. But I know that what I went through and what I continue to go through for years, it was God. It was my faith in Him that gave me the strength during that time, because what I was dealing with and to the level that I was dealing with it, that is not human strength.
Yeah. The traumatic event you experience is bad enough, but then to go through that type of public scrutiny, it just continues the abuse.
Yes.
It's like the initial abuse that's more than enough. Mm-hmm. That should never happen. It breaks my heart that happens, but I'm so sorry that you went through that.
And that effects of that last, because even when my children were babies, and I remember when Matthew was born, and, that wasn't all. I was a young mother, 19, and I remember holding him and crying and apologizing to him that I was his mother. Mm. I felt so bad for him because of what people viewed me as, that he deserved better than that, better mother, even knowing that I know I didn't do anything wrong. But obviously I don't feel that way now. My faith and my belief in Jesus has allowed me to see my worth. Mm. But I knew from going through all of that how he felt hollow and empty, and what survival felt like.
I mean, it's amazing how, God obviously has such a better understanding of the inner workings of all things. But for Matthew to have a mom that could have empathy for what he was going through, even though his story was different, I think is massively important. And the fact that you said he's 31, 32, and has gone through a healing process, I don't think that people get there without somebody in their corner. Obviously, we're at Emerge right now, and I've got so many clinicians in this building. We're all trauma-informed, trauma-trained therapists. And I can tell you, every trauma training I've been to and we've conducted here and so on, it's how people are received out of their trauma that will determine how well they reacclimate and heal. And, really, it was huge for you to be able to be present and give your son space, and going through, it sounds like a relatively dark time, but knowing that you had an understanding of how he was feeling, I think is so important. You guys have been through a lot.
Oh yeah, there's even more. There's more, and I discuss it in my memoir.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
So, I think it's important that I think healing needs to happen, but it's also then what becomes our story, what becomes our testimony, and then how do we utilize that? And that's kind of how, the beginning stages of our conversation were based on, because out of all of this stuff, and again, I'm going to encourage people to read your memoir because there's more. God put on your heart, hey, I need to write this down. And not only am I going to write this down, but now I'm going to start a podcast too. Talk about the journey that you took into getting this into words, and then some of the other things that you're doing.
Yeah, so I knew that I survived some pretty unsurvivable things in my life, and it's a miracle that I'm standing here today. And same with my son, with how dark, and how he did not want to live anymore. I knew that I owed it to Jesus to share my story and my testimony, because without him guiding me and my faith in him, I wouldn't be here today. It's a true miracle. And so I didn't want to not share, because I know there's other people out there. I know there's other people dealing with what I've dealt with, or what my son has dealt with, or anything really. And I wanted them to open up my book and realize, what, I'm not alone. That there is someone else that survived stuff that is unsurvivable and came out of it being able to help someone else. And I truly believe that God was preparing me all along through the different tragedies in my life. There's been loss. I dealt with loss when I was pregnant with my youngest son. My fiance had passed away. I was 8 months pregnant. I had to deal with that. There was some other situations that I talk about in the memoir. But I wanted them to be able to, to realize that they aren't alone, and Jesus does work His miracles, and sometimes you just got to slow down and see it happen. You know, everyone kind of assumes it's going to be this big picture, this big thing just miraculously happen, and no. It could be little steps. It could be simply a good day. You know, it's a day that there's no breakdown, but you had the strength to make it to that day. And I always told my son when, you know, his bad breakdowns, you know, there would be days where I would say, don't focus on tomorrow, just focus on this moment. But if this moment is too heavy, focus on tomorrow. And then if you don't feel like tomorrow's going to be any better, then focus on yourself in a year from now, because things will be different. And so with the memoir, that's why I wrote it. I owed it to Jesus. And then as far as the podcast, I didn't want people to end with the memoir. I wanted them to also have another place to go so that they can hear testimonies and other people that have dealt with tragedies and how they've dealt with it. And then also adding in, you know, counselors or authors of memoirs or books. And I've just interviewed a pastor.
Nice.
So I'm trying to have a place for people to go to.
That's great. Can you share the name of the book and the podcast?
Sure.
And I'll put all the links in the show notes.
So my memoir is A Mother's Journey Held by Faith. And then I also did write a 30-day devotional workbook as a companion. And that's also held by faith through grief and tragedy or trauma. And then the podcast is Held by Faith, the podcast.
And where can we find the book?
So the book is on Amazon and Walmart. And then there's other places, but that's the main two. And then the podcast is Spotify, iHeart, all the major streaming platforms.
And then you got a website too, right?
Yes, my website is wendyrollin.author.com.
Wendy Rollin, okay. And I'll put that all in the show notes. Wendy, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Just have faith in Jesus that He's with you, and pray. I pray every day. I've learned how strong prayer is and that Jesus listens. He is faithful.
Your story is, it's overwhelming, and I'm just so grateful that you're willing to share. I think it's so important for us to be able to tell stories of overcoming adversities that without God we wouldn't.
Right.
You know, I don't think for the last however long we've been recording that under our own strength, you, your son, or the people involved, that little girl, would be able to navigate this. You know, it's like it just always points towards Jesus when I hear these stories. I'm grateful for you sharing your story. I'm grateful to get to know you. It's been a real pleasure being a guest on your podcast, and then you returning the favor and being on ours, and just really grateful for you sharing with us.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful to be here.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for being on our podcast and sharing so much of your story and how you've gone through life's tough battles but found peace in resting in the Lord through all of it. What a testimony. You know, as you're listening, I don't know what you're going through right now, but I know we all will face fires in our life. I pray that Wendy's story gives you a bit of hope that through our faith we gain strength that is beyond us. Thank you so much for listening. Please share this show if you know someone who would benefit from this podcast. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless. In a world where life can feel overwhelming, there's a place in the greater Northeast Ohio area where people find peace, hope, and healing. Emerge Counseling Ministries. For over 50 years, Emerge continues to be a trusted faith-based counseling center offering professional mental health care with a foundation in Christian values. Whether you're struggling with anxiety, depression, grief, or simply feeling stuck, our licensed counselors are here to walk alongside you. And the impact speaks for itself. 97% of our clients say they would recommend Emerge to a friend. 98% say they truly felt understood and heard by their counselor. And 84% report that their issue is improving through the care with us. At Emerge, you're not just a case number, you're a whole person. And we are here to support your journey towards healing and growth. It's confidential, compassionate, Christ-centered care. Learn more or schedule an appointment today at emerge.org. That's EMERGE.org. Remember, you don't have to walk alone.